You gotta understand, the enemy's not the man, it's the mindset. Killing my people that's in a similar to COVID. No sense, how you take a life without a motive? Tired of seeing protest, dying to see progress. For the person that'll win in the end, doesn't really matter what's the color of the skin. When the bullets scatter, when they bleed from within, haven't we shed more blood than these tears?
I wanted to take advantage of the fact we have so many education people in the room. Wanted to talk a little bit about, get your feelings, your thoughts about the current state of K through 12 education, college education. Of course, I want to start with you this time.
State of education?
Yeah. What's good, what's bad? What have you seen? What are you seeing? Where are we today?
Well, I guess I should reiterate my perspective on it before I kind of get into what my thoughts are, because they're constrained by it. I've been teaching writing at the university level for since about 2012, so about 8 years. And before I was in Mansfield, or I guess Ohio, I moved here from Texas about 2 years ago, and I was teaching at the University of Houston, which Houston's an incredibly diverse city, and I was able to have a very diverse classroom, students from all walks of life, socioeconomically, ethnically, racially, and so many different other experiences. And I will say that maybe I can speak to the difference from what I saw in Houston versus what I saw in Ohio, in that students seemed a lot more resilient in Houston than they did in my current area in Findlay. And I'm not really sure exactly what to chalk that up to, but I know that they were, in Houston, a little bit more ready to take risks. I don't know if this is something that some of the K through 12 educators can speak to, but I know that a lot of that I see in the students that I teach now, risk-taking is very frightening.
What do you mean by risk-taking?
Well, it depends on the context, but like in particular in my writing classes, I'm trying to challenge my students to consider new ideas, right? Maybe encounter different histories, to challenge the hegemonic thoughts that have been implanted in their heads by the curriculums that we should be burning down. I couldn't. I mean, there are so many different types of risks that they can take, but it's always very scary to do so, because if they don't succeed, they are going to they'll fail numerically, or they'll lose face in front of their colleagues and peers, or they'll just feel crappy. And I think that we can all agree that risk-taking is enormously important. It's a very difficult thing to continue to do because it involves a lot of failure. But one of the things I'd love to see our education system do more, and that I think could help in conversations that involve discomfort and disagreement, would be this encouragement of risk-taking. Perhaps in more insulated situations you can get used to falling. But yeah, that kind of resilience I think is missing. I don't want to sound like Ben Sass and be like, oh, the American child is made out of marshmallows and can't treat them like they're over a fire or whatever, because right. I'm not like, let's just make them all, pick the cotton nut right on the bag kind of thing. But I don't know, that's just like a thing that I've noticed quite a bit of.
And I feel like I'm always coming, but I also think it's because how we started teaching to those tests, like critical thinking went out of the window. We don't have a lot of critical thinkers. When you challenge them to think, people do, they want it to be readily, disposable to them. So we spent too much time teaching to those tests. We took a lot of their critical thinking away from them in just the way that it's taught. What I found in teaching in an urban school, which was really interesting, that I didn't, we spend the better part of that teaching to the middle half and the bottom, and like the kids who would be critical thinkers aren't gaining enough information, and we're not lifting those kids up from the bottom. So unfortunately, I feel like we fell into this line where we celebrate mediocrity to a point that it's frightening. Like, it was extremely frightening to me. So that was important as I raised my two children, that they thought critically, that consistently, those were conversations that we were having. That was stuff that I brought up. And it did very well, but I still see my daughter, she went away, and the minute she got her first C, Keely graduated valedictorian, she called me and just like, oh, I'm failing. I mean, it was just absolute. And I said, no, this is the time where you get to figure out who you are. You might decide that you want to be something else in college. That was just extremely uncomfortable for her. And so I do. Scary.
From your perspective, Chris, leading a high school.
My perspective, I align with what you just said right there. I mean, the test is a huge problem, I think, in schools, and it has led us to teach to that middle of the road gap. You know, you're trying to get those kids that are not so successful up to a certain level, and a lot of times you're not challenging the kids that need to be challenged, and so that they're getting uncomfortable in their situation and learning from that. I've always told my son and kids around that you need to be uncomfortable in order to get better, no matter what you're doing, whether it's sports or school or life or whatever. If you're always comfortable, you're the same person. And I think the tests are a huge hurdle in that, to be honest with you.
Where'd the idea for those tests come from? Anybody remember?
Which ones?
Any of them? I mean, let's go back. I think it started with what, the freshman proficiency
Ninth grade
test.
proficiency,
Right.
then the 12th grade, then
Right.
the OGT, then EOCs.
What drives that?
Is it federal funding? Like you have to meet certain benchmarks?
Look, we're both like looking
White
like
supremacy.
it's like it's so.
Well, I mean, I'm being somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but not like, I think the contemporary testing roots are in just the way in which we're societally trying to create markers and attainments and spaces for failure, like voting rights registration. I'm just thinking about historically of what you put in place when you are trying to sell people a package of equality and opportunity, when all the systems are set up to deny that. So then there's this, I mean, I know this, people are like, oh, it's too deep. And I'm like, no, we have to have reasons, for it, because otherwise it falls back on the ways in which you build these systems, which is the individual is lacking, right? And that's the problem with the way we need to understand, individual behavior and then systemic behavior. So I was just like, with testing, it does become this sort of middle of the road place where we can't inspire young people. We can't inspire kids to be critical thinkers and give them opportunities, because it's largely, it's just maintaining this sort of past behavior where I just keep thinking about it as scarcity models. We're so full of fear, and we're always operating on scarcity when, it's just a couple weeks ago, they're just, in this pandemic model where you're like, they just printed more money. It's like, the fact that we're all in this rat race and it's so intense, and you go, wait a second, oh, this is a game, literally constructed from the moment that the country is founded on all these different mythologies. But so that's the thing, is I just wish we all could try understanding that everyone's lived experience is totally different and intense, and we're all in different levels of fear, but you got to look at the whole system, and that's the thing, is like, but race is a fundamental framing factor. That's how you build racial capitalism. You're like, look over here instead of over here, how it's actually playing out, and it really is the same model of a handful of elite folk while the rest of us duke it out, and that it was created. So I'll stop because it's my favorite history to tell, because I'm like, everybody needs to know it. I was like, you see me in the street, they're like, avoid her, she's coming at you. I'm like, Bacon's Rebellion, you got to know it. Genocide. Anyway, sorry, I thought I'd spice it up.
But like as a tool of division, kind of, right? It's trying to sort people into boxes and make it easier for the powers that be to say, oh, anybody who doesn't necessarily look like a cisgender, heterosexual, middle-class white dude, you go over here, which is lacking, right? Like I see this all the time in writing, because language is incredibly important to all of us, right? Our language is something that helps represent us. It's a marker of who we are, where we've come from, who we consort with, what communities we're a part of, what histories we care about, all this kind of stuff, right? And I spent a lot of time working in a writing center before I came here, and we were always trying to figure out, like, how can we make it so that we are not agents of the white state trying to have all of our students who might not speak a white kind of English be discriminated against by their writing instructors, because there are so many different grammatically correct ways of speaking English that are not necessarily the way that I speak, right? But for whatever reason, dudes like me have been in power for a long enough time that this is what we assume is the right kind of English. And so like just another tool for white supremacy to reinstate itself over and over and over again.
No one wants to hear that because it just sounds like something over there that you can't relate to. But it's like you break it down in basic ways, and and that's what I want to do with education, is make it accessible. Like you're using some of the big words, and those are good words, right? Words matter, but we also still that's how we, it's education is that space of distancing ourselves from each other, and is an opportunity. But yeah, I definitely don't want to nominate things.
It 100%, he asked if it was based on funding, but it is. And then realistically, if you've ever looked at any of those 3rd grade tests, proficiencies, or 4th grade tests, they ask questions like, what would you wear if you went to a regatta? What would you do? Now, how would an inner city student...
Regatta?
Yeah.
Wow.
How would an inner city student understand that? But, if you were a wealthy kid who went to a prep school in Manhattan or somewhere and you saw these beautiful boats and you understood what that was, it really is. It's a separation. And then those schools will get more funding because how well are those kids going to test? I mean, it really is. It's a horrible unequalizer. So it's just, I always say you don't want to bring something political in it, but when you think about the administration who brought those standardized testings in, sometimes we got to follow those patterns realistically. And it's like she said, that's a long, ugly story that we'd all cringe at. But realistically, those are some of the things that happen. And it very much so, it makes a clear separating line in what kids are proficiently testing on that test and how they're doing it. But if you ever look at those questions, even if you look at what AP studies are still on, when there's this challenge of should we still be using Huckleberry Finn? Should we still be using these books that use horrible racial slurs and all of those things? And I always think about that. They used that book when I was growing up, and how is it to be an honor student sitting in an honors class where I graduated with 355 students and 5 of us were African American. So it's and you have to still sit and people say, oh, it's a wonderful story about a young black boy in a relationship with a man. An older black man in a relationship with a boy. I was like, who was his servant? Come on, it just depends on how you're feeling about that. But people will argue that that's great literature, and there are wonderful pieces, as Beth will, and that could easily take place of those books, elevate to another level, make people critically think and see relationships on a more realistic level, not those of servitude and master in any way, shape, or form.
Marquis, as somebody, probably the only person in the room that took a lot of these proficiency tests, because they weren't around when I was in school all that much, talk about your experiences. What was it like to study for and perform those standardized tests?
So the consensus around me and my friends, it was just total useless. It was useless because all the tests, the questions, seemed like they'd be culturally biased, and it just seemed like it just had no relevancy to anything that we were learning or anything that we were going to be encountering. And even the people, our counterparts who were older than us, we were asked sort of maybe 2 or 3 grades older than us, that we can ask, so how was it when you took, so we can get an edge to maybe pass, and they were all telling that it was total BS. So just going through it, and they put so much pressure on us to pass these in order to be able to graduate, and we were just like, for what for? What do we need it for? And especially when none of the questions on here have anything to do with what our day-to-day living or preparing us to what we want to do with our life going forward for college or anything else. So it had no base to us at all. So we were just really clueless on why we even had to take it.
Did y'all stress over it like everybody
else? We had to, because it was the only way to get out of school. It was the only way to get out of school. And if you growing up in my home and our type of parents, if you don't graduate, then you got to figure something out, and you got to get out of this house one way or the other. So you got to come with a diploma, and you better walk with your class. So you better get on it and get this test out of the way. So it was very stressful, but for what?
Yeah, what a weird thing to stress about. Be like, this is really scary, but at the same time, total crap.
Absolutely. And we were in no position to challenge anybody about this, of course, because this is in the curriculum. So if we ever did, it would just go fall on deaf ears, and it felt like it was unfair.
Isn't it interesting, Bruce, that these standardized tests, which have become so crucial, have to be done, they have to be done. COVID-19 hits, Nobody has to take standardized tests this year. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, kind of twofold. First, I would like to share, I think for as education in America needs to be revised. Our educators are overworked and underpaid. Seriously. We need to get back to the old landmark so that they can be empowered to teach and lead, by example when they teach in their classrooms. Kids can't even retain things, in this day, in this time. Technology is a wonderful thing, but I think the way that we use technology, in this day, in this time, I think it's kind of dangerous because, me, myself, 57 years old, and I have a grandchild that goes to Ontario school system. And Ontario did a wonderful job, with the way that they did things. But it was hard for the kids, and it was very difficult for the teachers, that was trying to facilitate that. So I think, as a nation, we need to invest in our education more, and do better, by our educators. Now, I like to reflect off of something that Marquis shared, as it relates to the test. He said the test was culturally biased. Now, brother, you blew my mind when you said that, because when you talk about culture, in America, in my opinion, is the only place on the planet that is the country that does not have culture. To define culture in America, you really pulling off a grand thing. Seriously, and the reason I say that, America is composed and made up of people from all walks of life. It's just like a great big fruit bowl, man. You throw all different type of fruits in the bowl and you shake it up, and it's what you get.
But do you believe that culture is not relative to like who and where we are? Like, interestingly enough, he said that, and I've been working on like a coalition with our local police department, and we talked about that, and I said, what's the cultural competency that you guys are learning? Because there's one of the things that I know. If I see a young man, like first and foremost, like African-American males, I can't tell the difference whether you're 18 or 30, first and foremost. I just can't tell their age sometimes because of the way they look. The other thing I do know about them is sometimes in our community, if they're under age 30, if you're speaking to someone or you go to grab them, they don't respond to you and you tap their arm, like, and it's not just African Americans, it's culturally like young people, they're all wearing those earbuds or whatever, so they can't hear you anywhere. And so I said to the officer, I would love for you guys to understand that culturally that's a thing. They're not being disrespectful or walking away from you. They sometimes have earbuds. Like, we might literally have to find a new way of tapping and communicating with them. The things that we have to teach, like our boys, because I'm sure you understand this, Bruce and Marquis, where I used to say to my son, don't walk around with your hood up. Take your hands out of your pockets. Don't, all of those things. But culturally, if you're in our community, you know that that's not a problem. A kid walking in my classroom, he has his hood up and, hey, are you cold? Are you doing, oh no, can you just take that down? Okay, Miss Weese. Where somebody else, a teacher would flip out, like that's horrible to them, and to me it's just like, why is your hood up? And sometimes they would say that, I don't have my brush, I haven't brushed my waves yet. Okay, go get your brush, go in the bathroom, get your hair together and come back out and see me, but take the hood up. And it doesn't bother me as much. So is that what you're relating to? Because culturally, like, sometimes things aren't as relative to, because I do understand we are a melting pot, but some things they're congruent with the culture of people that we're
a melting pot, sister, but allow me to say this, if you will. Our young people, are our future. And as a middle-aged person, it's time for me to get off the track and lead by example. suffer the little children to come unto you and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom. Just being a little biblical, because I am a preacher. But perfect analogy, and I shared this earlier in the week. You take a 17-year-old young white male and a 17-year-old young black male, and if the 17-year-old young white male says to the 17-year-old young black male in the front of a group of people composed such as us, from all walks of life, that's my nigga. For older, black people, they would naturally be offended, but for a group, and I have seen this happen for a group of younger black people, that's a language that they use towards one another, in today's society. So, so how do you juggle that? And I think, these are the type of things that we need to talk about, and I think these are the type of things that we need to hear from them.
Absolutely. And I 100% agree with you. Because that's sometimes when people are asking those questions, like, what do young black men, like they ask us from, why do young black men not want to, join the police department? I said, why are you asking a middle-aged black woman? Why are you asking me? Because that's not something I can answer for you. You need to go speak to young black males to find out why they're not interested in doing that as well. Because that's what I can't speak for what young black males. I can't even speak for young black females. I don't want to. I don't want to be the spokesperson. But I 100% agree with you that they do things that are different for us, and we need to talk to them, hear why. Tell us why.
It's reminding me of what you said earlier too, Marquis, about what you talk about with some of your players, right? Where you're like, hey, y'all are representing, I assume, of course you talk about the school, the team, but themselves, but then they're also representatives of their race, whether or not they want to be it, right? And that seems, that's a burden that's placed so much more on folks of color than it ever is on white kids, right?
It is.
I guess I just want to note that. I'm not sure what to do with that because it's still going to continue, unfortunately. But I don't know what we do to alleviate that burden in other ways aside from continuing education, access to history, and a sense that every individual is an individual and not necessarily like the sole representative of their particular subject position.
I think call it out. I think his calling it out to say that, because that's what I do. When somebody says, I'm not a representative for young black men, don't ask me. Ask them. And by your calling it out to your white peers, it makes them more relative of saying that as well. Because I think Mr. Bond, Marquis can, we go somewhere and the first thing, do you know so-and-so? Do you know so-and-so? And I want to ask them back, do I know every white person? Do you know every white person that I know? Why are you asking? It's just, but it is funny. So I think it just has to be called out.
Well, we talk about racism, and we hear a lot of dialogue and discussion about racism, but it's one word, that we don't talk about. You rarely hear it mentioned, and that's bigotry. And that's getting to the root of the matter, when we begin to start talking about bigotry, because bigotry permeates from within us. That's what's coming out. Racism is the agent, that drives bigotry. So, we got to start calling one another out on this bigotry, man. Because bigotry has no place in our society. Bigotry should not be found amongst any of us. I have a saying, the best of us takes care of the rest of us. So I need to be so decent in my invocation that I can call a man or a woman, on their bigotry. And be very comfortable, with content and with character.
Carter, you had said something about the need for continued learning of history, but I want to ask Beth, if we continue to teach what we're already teaching, are we getting anywhere?
This is the biggest moment in modern human history to make bold, unapologetic changes. That's, I mean, just from a trickle-down experience, I mean, that's part of why, I mean, I'm glad these talks are happening. But, you know, we're still primarily, you know, a lot of Ohio is that way, but the entire world is recognizing things and active for change right now, systemically. And it's being driven by the concept of racism or anti-Black racism and understanding how these things are made. But, you know, words matter, and we don't know often. We don't have it's not so much of like it's the way we all have a different understanding things based on our own personal experiences, and just the fact that the histories of race and racism and how we talk to one another, how we qualify it, how we're still using the word diverse because we're normalizing whiteness as the center. We made whiteness and then we made it disappear, and then when we bring it up, it takes up all the air in the room. And so it's very challenging because I'm also recognizing intergenerationally how much things, you know, so often the challenge is we're talking about the same thing, but our words blow it up, right? And because we're just so typically not comfortable or not able. I realize like sometimes I talk too freely about it and I upset people in all kinds of different ways, but that's why I'm always like, talk about white. Let's white it out. Whitey, extra white with white on top. Let's just get it out there. Then let's talk about like human beings and those other things. But this is a rambling way to just say that to me, you know, it's like suddenly the whole world's paying attention. They don't know what to do. Some people are freaking out. Other people are like, oh, welcome, you know, to this struggle that we have been in, you know, from the moment. So I just want us to have radical imagination, to think big, and, you know, try not to be in a place of constant fear.